स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पाद शंकरं लोकशंकरं शंकरं शंकराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ॐ त्वमेव माता च पिता त्वमेव बन्धुश्च सखा त्वमेव विद्या द्रविणं त्वमेव सर्वं मम देव। ओम गुरुदेव भगवान शिव शंकर भोलेनाथ कैलाशपति महाराज की जय, भगवान व्यास जी महाराज की जय, शंकराचार्य भगवान की जय, स्वामी चिन्मयानंद भगवान की जय, स्वामी दयानंद भगवान की जय, स्वामी प्रबुधानंद भगवान की जय, स्वामी शुद्धानंद भगवान की जय, साध्वी आनंद ज्योति जी की जय, माता पिता की जय, सभी गुरु देवताओं की जय, सभी गुरु देवताओं की जय, सभी गुरु देवताओं की जय। श्री कृष्ण गोविंद हरे मुरारी, हे नाथ नारायण वासुदेवा। श्रीमद् भगवद गीता chapter 6 verse number 34 we have to start. The last class we had seen verse number 33, in which Arjuna says, Hey Krishna, hey Madhusudana, the yoga that you have talked about as sameness, I don't see its steady vision due to agitation of the mind. The mind is full of agitation. And he further says, the mind is agitation. Chanchala hi manah Krishna pramathi balvardhadam tasyaham nigraham manye vayoriva sudushkaram. Krishna, O Krishna, he in fact, manah, mind, chanchalam is agitation, pramathi means tyrant, balvat strong, dhardham well rooted, aham I, tasya of it, nigraham control, vyoha iva as the wind, sudarshkaram too difficult, impossible to do, manye think. In fact, Krishna, the mind is agitation. The mind is agitation. A strong, well-rooted tyrant. I think of it as impossible to control as the wind. The mind keeps on flickering. Using a rather long compound, Shankaracharya ji defines Krishna here as Bhakta Jnana Papa Dosha Akarshanaha, one who removes Akarshati, all the limitations, Akarshati, Dosha, such as sins, etc., Papadi, Pap Adi, of people who are his devotee, Bhakta Janas. This is the way the Lord is called Krishna in Gita. This is how Krishna is called here. Krishna means, O Krishna means here, Bhakta Jana Papadi Dosha Akarshana. The words Pramati, Balvat and Dardha are attributes of the mind that Arjuna talks about. Not only is the mind chanchala, it is also terrent, pramathi, which shapes one up. To say that the mind is agitated is not enough. In fact, mind is agitation. The mind has the capacity to bring one's senses, one's body, reasons, everything under its control. The mind has the capacity to bring one's senses, body, reasons, everything under its control. It just takes charge of everything. One's reason does not seem to have any say over this mind. For instance, no one voluntarily wants to become sad, but one is sad. No one wants to be angry, but one is angry. Emotions like sorrow and anger are conditions of the mind and seems to have hold over the person. One's culture, upbringing, status and knowledge do not seem to have any say when one is angry. In fact, one's culture seems to be totally forgotten and an entirely new language emerges. When one is angry, the new language, anger brings out a new language. One that is not found in any dictionary. This language, although generally understood by everyone, the language is understood by everyone, but it is not present in any dictionary. The meaning of the words used in that form, the angry man, since everyone use it occasionally, it usually kept suppressed. Culture implies language, but when a person becomes angry and use such unbecoming, unexpected language, the person's culture is gone. Gone. No matter how refined and cultured, no matter how manicured and pedicured, all the culture the person has ever cultivated is nowhere to be seen in the moment of anger. When a person is angry, all his upbringing is gone. The person's knowledge is also not available at such time. Everyone knows very well that sadness does not produce a desirable result. The sadder one is, the more problem one has. No one has solved any problem through sorrows. This is all very clear, very rational. As Krishna himself has said when he first began his dialogue with Arjuna, saying, "You grieve for those who should not be grieved, and yet you speak words of wisdom. Ashochen anavasochtavam paragyanat cha bahase." Everyone knows this, and other people also tell you. But sadness seems to be something that does not take your permission. The sadness doesn't take your permission to enter your mind. If it did, you would definitely not give it. Who want to be sad? Only when permission is sought is there a question of you granting it or not. Sadness means there is a particular type of thinking going on. Without thinking, you cannot be sad. Sadness is not like hunger, thirst, or sleep. Without thinking, you become hungry. Without thinking, you go to sleep, especially after a big meal. And in the morning, without thinking, you are as hungry as a wolf. So to be hungry, you don't have to think. whereas to be sad you do. In fact, to be sad, angry, hateful, agitated, depressed, frustrated, you need to think, and think a lot. When you are sad, you are angry, you are agitated, you are hateful, depressed, all these emotions when you are thinking of those emotions. You are thinking at that time. The mind is virdha. It keeps one under its control. The mind is very much present at the same time. It does not take your permission. This implies two people here. One who is highly cultured, educated, sophisticated, and very considerate, and those whose language, style, demeanor, and decorum are quite different from the other person, the angry person. This person seemed to have a parallel life, occupying the same mind and the same place, but this person seemed to have her own roots and definitely seemed to be in charge. And when this person takes charge, everything is gone. This is what is called paramathin here, and a torrent that can disturb and take control of the body, mind, senses, everything. One may now ask, if it takes charge like this, why not take control of it with some other greater force? After all, if someone wants to control me, I can also control that person. All I require is to reinforce myself properly, even with enough weapons, enough strength, then I can regain control. But this kind of reinforcement does not work here. Whatever strength I manage to muster up for myself to control Paramatman is not adequate. The other always seems to be stronger. It controls me and it is stronger. Balavat, it holds is so strong that I cannot wrench myself from its control. I cannot even wriggle out of it, nor can anyone get out from under it either. Arjuna describes the mind as dirdha here, meaning that it keeps one under its control, just like the silk that winds around the worm. Keep it inside the cocoon until it grows adequately to come out. Dirdha also can be translated as well rooted. The mind has its own root that seems to be so deep that nothing is strong enough to uproot it. Storms generally uproot things, but this mind cannot be uprooted by any storm. No amount of brainstorming can do it. The mind has its roots in childhood and has picked up all kind of problems from childhood onwards. As a child, one's perceptions are limited, and to those perceptions others are added along the way. Thus, there is a core personality with a lot of added embellishments. Together they seem to be a person, someone who is altogether different, whom we call the mind, the psychological mind. It is this psychological mind, the emotional mind, that Arjuna is talking about here. The mind that is dirdha. The well-rooted mind that controls everything. To control such a mind, Arjuna says, is something he considers to be very difficult to do. Tasya aham nigraham manye sudushkrama. Dushkara means difficult. Dushkara. And sudushkara means very difficult. Arjuna compares any attempt to control the mind with trying to catch the air in one hand Vayoh iva sudushkaram. The air is not available for catching. You cannot catch air. Therefore, to control it is impossible. Even if you try to trap the mind somewhere like you can trap air, you cannot do it, because the mind would always be outside of the trap you set for it. It would just look at you, almost teasing you. If this not what happens, you think you have given the mind a job to do, like chanting a mantra. Come on, turbulent mind chants. Okay. Come on, turbulent mind, chant. Then you think that mind is doing it, until you find that it is outside somewhere. The mind may have taken you so far away that you do not know how long you were there, or remember what you were doing before. Somewhere the mind trips you up and then takes you for a ride. It is so elusive that you cannot even set a trap for it, which is why the mind is compared to a monkey. Therefore, to have to do something with this mind is no small job, Arjuna said. And he lived in an era where stress was not the concern it is today. Since the society was not under so much pressure as it is today, Arjuna had lot of leisure and did not have all the hurry that you have today. Yet he had a mind, albeit a very cultured mind, that was chanchala. And if Arjuna's mind was chanchala, you can imagine what the mind of his cousin Duryodhana must have been like. Arjuna at least had no conflicts between. He did not live a life of adharma. He lived a clean life, an unquestionable life, which meant that he slept well because he did not nurse any guilt inside. Whereas Duryodhana was a guilty person from head to foot, with all the conflict what goes with the life of adharma. Arjuna was a man given to a life of dharma, right conduct, right values, and great achievements too. Thus, there was nothing for him to smart or feel spiteful about. He was successful in all his pursuits and had a lot of titles showered upon him. In other words, he was a master of his age, a man who on any given day could be proud of his life and his achievements. Everyone in the society looked upon to Arjuna. Even before the great war of Mahabharata took place, he was a versatile person, a man of music, dance, archery, and other disciplines of knowledge. He was a great warrior and also a prince. But even with all his qualifications, Arjuna's mind was chanchala. Everybody's mind is chanchala. Arjuna's problem is universal. This is not one man's problem. It is everybody's problem. If Arjuna's mind was nothing but agitation, what about those minds given to the modern phenomenon called stress? People nowadays have a lot of stress. What chanchalness! Something happens in Iran, and having read about it in the morning paper, you are already upset before you even have your shower. And nowadays with the mobile phones, it is more faster. Anyone living in today's world where the input is so much can identify with Arjuna's problem and ask the same question. The problem is very well known, as Shankara also confirms in Arjuna's. In Arjuna's time, the question was relevant. In Shankara's time, it was relevant. And today, it is relevant. In fact, the nature of the mind being what it is, it will always be relevant. Therefore, you have to know the ways of the mind by paying attention to it. and gain certain mastery. In the next verse, Krishna answers the question, Arjuna's question about how to manage the mind. In verse number 36, 35 and 36, Bhagavan answers the Arjuna's question. The mind is mastered by practice and objectivity. This is what Bhagavan is going to explain now. श्रीभगवान् उवाच असंशयं महाबाहो मनः दुर्निग्रहं चलम् अभ्यासेन तु कौन्तेय वैराग्येण च गृह्यते. What does Bhagavan says? Shri Bhagavan, Lord Krishna, Uvacha, said, Mahabhavo, O mighty armed Arjuna, mighty armed, asamayam, no doubt, asamayam, manaha, mind, durnigraham, difficult to master. Calm is agitated. Tu, but Kante, O son of Kunti, Arjuna, abhyasena, by practice, cha, and vairagyena, vairagya means objectifying, by objectivity, grehate is mastered. Shri Bhagavan says, no doubt Arjuna, the mighty armed, the mind is agitated and difficult to master. But Kante, Arjuna, Kante, because he is son of Kunti, is always referred as Kante. It is mastered by practice and objectivity. Here Krishna first addresses Arjuna as Mahabhavo, O mighty armed, being a great warrior. Arjuna was of course considered to be mighty, but his might, his strength should include his mastery over his mind. One's strength may be useful for knocking the heads of others, but it is not enough to take care of one's own silly mind. Krishna confirms this here by saying, asamasyam, no doubt, indicating that there is no doubt that the mind is restless and difficult to master. Who says the mind is not restless? To recognize that the mind is restless is to have won half the battle. When you understand, when you come to know that you are unable to control your mind is restless, it is not controllable, you are half there. Suppose someone tells me that his or her mind is agitated, then I say that getting agitated is not good at all, that it does not solve anything, and therefore do not get agitated. All that will happen is that person will become more agitated. That what use is such advice? It is not as though the person wants to get agitated. Therefore, this particular advice is useless. Advising someone, please don't be sorry, please don't be sad, your cousin is dead, your son is dead, your wife is dead, please don't be sorrowful, don't be sad. He will be more agitated. he will not like this advice. Telling someone not to get agitated does not help at all. Whereas if I accept agitation as the nature of the mind, half the battle is won. So one should accept, yes, it is a sorrowful moment. It is a moment of agitation. Someone close is no more now. All the facilities, all the happiness provided by him will not be there anymore. Acceptance is the first step. In the program of recovery sponsored by Alcoholics Anonymous, the first step is for the person to say that he or she has no power over alcohol. This has to be accepted first. Otherwise, there is no hope of recovery. The same thing is true with everything, not just as alcohol. I have no power over anger. I have no power over this restless mind. When I accept this, then half the battle is won. Krishna accepts this one great psychological fact, that the nature of the mind is agitation. You do not try to remove the agitation. You cannot remove the sorrow from the mind. You cannot remove the anger you cannot remove the agitation from the mind. You simply accept that it is agitation. Do not get agitated over agitation, thinking that it is something you are going to solve. Also note, do not think that your mind is something peculiar, because it is not. Any mind is agitation. Agitation is the nature of the mind, because the mind has to change. It is meant to change. Try to imagine a mind that has constant thought. A constant thought means that you cannot see anything else. 10 miles ago you saw one tree and still the tree is right in front of you. Nothing else is there. No car, no person, nothing. You would not even survive with such a mind. The mind must necessarily change. Just as in a movie, the frame must always be changing at a certain speed for you to be able to see objects, movement, etc. Here too the mind has to keep changing all the time so that you can see. That is why the mind is called Kshanika. The mind is Kshanika. One peculiar thought is always Kshanika, meaning that it does not even last for a second. Just to say the word second involves so many parts, so many frames and so many changes, all which are Kshanika. This is the nature of vritti. The thought, even to recognize this fact, the mind has to be Kshanika. Since the mature mind is Kshanika, naturally it is going to change. Therefore Krishna says, there is no doubt. There is no doubt about it. Arjuna, the mind is chala, chanchala, restless. Chala also means agitation. Chala, chanchala. And being chala, it is very difficult to control. Manaha, durnigraham chalam. He said, in other words, he agrees with what Arjuna has said about the mind, that it is as difficult to have mastery over the mind as over the wind. By repeating what Arjuna has said, he is saying that the nature of the mind should be accepted as such. Accept the fact that the mind is agitation, that it has its own root, its own logic, and therefore it is never illogical. We always think the mind is illogical, but that is not correct. The mind does not have its own logic. If we suddenly think of something, we think that thought has that We think that thought has come from nowhere, but it has not come from nowhere. It has come from somewhere, meaning that there is some logic for it. But why, when nothing has happened outside, when everything is calm, do I suddenly have this thought? It simply means that outside situations are not required for a thought to occur. I have enough going on inside for this to happen. Why, for example, in the mindset of meditation, do I suddenly think of okras? Okras, also known as lady finger, is a flowering plant in the mallow family. For example, in the midst of meditation, when somebody is sitting quietly in front of God, meditating, and suddenly remembers of okra or something else, there must be logic for it. The point here is that whatever suddenly occurs in my head has its own logic. There is nothing illogical in this world. There is always some logic. What is illogical, we find there is logic. That is, when something occurs, there is some reason for it. We must understand. Then the mind is like that. The mind is like this. It is its nature. Does it mean that I should leave the mind as it is? I could say yes, the mind is agitation. Forget about it. Do not worry about it. The problem, however, is that when the mind is agitation, I am agitation. Therefore, I have to learn to discover the distance between the mind and I. This is the whole trick. This is the only trick, which is why Krishna tells Arjuna that the mind can be mastered by practice and objectivity. Abhyasena tu konthaya vairagyena chakra grihate. Caring of the child within. By addressing Arjuna here as Kante, the son of Kunti, Krishna is indicating that the child was still there in Arjuna, which is where the mind has its root. The child's need to be taken care by the adult. Therefore, there is double child care. When you were child, someone else took care of you, but now you have to take care of your inner child. The first child care is done by your parents or the other adults, whereas the inner child care must be done by the person. Everyone nurses a child inside, and that child has to be taken care of. Everyone needs to do it. There is always a child who is disappointed in his or her perceptions. My mother does not like me, my father hates me. These were the child's perception, and because of the behavior of the people involved, they have some validity. This is why the child remains inside the person. There is always a crying child, a weeping child down below, which is why the mind suddenly takes off, especially when you reach the age of 35 and over. This is the time that all the disappointments of the child come out one by one. And when you begin to study Vedanta, they all come out. Studying Vedanta means that you look at yourself. Studying Vedanta is not looking at anything else, anything outside. It is looking at oneself. Previously, you were doing other things. Looking at yourself is the first thing that must be done here, which is when the child comes out. When else will this child be taken care of? It has to be taken care of. It has to be addressed. Otherwise, you become 75-year-old and are still a child. This is the point Krishna is making here by calling Arjuna as Kanthaya. Kanthaya means he is calling Kunti's son. Oh, Kunti's son. Oh, child. Or let me say, he could have, oh, my child. Mind is like that. First, he refers to Arjuna as adult. Mahabhavo, Mahabhaho, and then asks him to take care of the child by addressing him as Kantaya. Krishna then tells Arjuna how this is to be done, saying that by practice and objectivity the mind can be mastered. Abhyasena vairagyena chagrahayate. So beautiful it is. What is abhyasa? Practice. What is practice? It is the practice of yoga, just discussed by Krishna, through which certain distance is gained between your mind and yourself. You are not your mind. This distance enables you to look at yourself positively, to see yourself exactly as you are, to see what the nature of I is. In this way you come to understand that every thought is you, no doubt, but that you are free from all the thoughts. There is a sorrow, but you are not the sorrow. You are free from all thoughts. From thoughts you are free. Seeing this particular fact more and more, seeing it inside very clearly, is what is meant by abhyasa. Continuously, again and again and again and again, seeing, trying to understand. Trying to understand that every thought is you, but you are not the thought. Every thought is you, but you are not the thought. This is greatest revelation. Seeing this particular situation, thought being I, while I is not any thought, is what is called nididhyasana. And doing the same thing again and again is called abhyasa, which enables you to gain mastery over your mind. Abhyasena grihate. Practice and usefulness of japa. Now here japa comes. Here the practice, abhyasa of japa can be included, also be included, because the mind's nature is not predictable. What your next thought will be is also not predictable. It can be anything. Since the next thought can be anything which you cannot predict, that it will be, you create a predictable situation. Only then you can understand how the mind moves and so on. In this way you have to get certain hold over the mind, over the thinking process itself. That is why mental repetition is of given mantra, a meaningful name, word or sentence called japa, is must and is never given up even by a sannyasi, so that your mind remains on the one thought, predetermined. Your mind remains on to that meaningful name or a word or a sentence or a mantra or a shloka. This is called japa. You just try to keep your mind on one thought is called japa. Not letting your mind wander where you don't even know what your next thought is going to be. That is why it is said, do japa. Keep on saying Ram, 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 Ram. So there is no other thought other than Ram. There is no other thought. No thought comes in the mind when you do japa. That is why. Any shloka, Om Bhur Bhuvah स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्. So that there is no other thought that comes into the mind. You are now restricting the thought to one thought, on one object, let us say, by doing mental repetition of a given mantra. Any mantra you can take. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardanam Urvarukmiv Bandhanam Mrityurmukshayamamritat. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardanam Urvarukmiv Bandhanam Mrityurmukshayamamritat. Any mantra, any word, any sentence is called japa. It is a must and is never given up, even by sannyasi. That a sannyasi even keeps on doing japa, just to keep their mind, just to be in one thought, not letting other thoughts. A brahmachari has a mantra, a grahastha has a mantra, a vanprastha has a mantra, and a sannyasi also has a mantra. There is no one who is without a word that is a meaningful. Without a word that is a meaningful. Either chosen by the person or given to that person. Either you choose that. You can choose by yourself. There is no harm in choosing. You can choose anything you want. Or some guru or your forefathers or your traditional, you can take from them, given by that person. A particular mantra is important because it gives you a certain hold. That is why japa is a common to all tradition. It gives you this particular capacity of knowing exactly what is going to happen next. When you do japa, you know that the next word is again going to be Rama only. Again Rama only. And again Rama only. Rama 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 Ram Rama 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 Ram. You keep on. Now the mind is going into the lay, tal. So you don't sing it, just Ram, 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 Ram. Bring it back. If it goes, then bring it back to Ram only. Or whatever your mantra is, whatever your word is, whatever your sentence is, should be meaningful. It gives you this particular capacity of knowing exactly what is going to happen next. It is the only situation where the mind is predictable. Now you know what your next thought is. The next thought is Ram. And if you divert your thought, you can bring it back to Ram. Ram, 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 Ram. Bringing it back from the tal, lay, everything, bring it back. Don't make it musical. Make it simple. You can keep on singing. If your thoughts don't go into music, then okay, keep singing. Even when you find yourself dwelling upon a particular object, you do not know what your next thought is going to be. And when you decide to dwell upon a given object, to inquire into it, you are not very clear about how to inquiry is going to proceed. Whereas here, repetition being what it is, you have a definite occupation. This gives you to handle over the mind so that when it moves away, you understand what is happening. Again and again, you bring it back to the object of meditation. If something else is mind is not allowed to divert. That is why japa is important. That is why don't get involved into tal, lay, singing and all. Only pure repetition of a given mantra. This gives you a handle over the mind, so that when it moves away, you understand what is happening. You don't allow it. You again and again you bring it back to the object of meditation. This is what our topic is, to bring it back. Here, Atma is as though the object of meditation. In order to make the mind abide in the Atma, to make the mind Atma Sanstha, Samastha, this Abhyasa practice is the meditation that is in keeping with the teaching. The repetition itself is called Abhyasa. Even in Sanskrit grammar, Abhyasa means duplication. Because of this Abhyasa, you learn the way of the mind. You come to have some insight about it. In this particular Abhyasa, even the object of distraction becomes the object of meditation, as discussed earlier. Wherever the mind goes, when I turn my attention, yantra yantra manoyati tatra tatra samadhyana samadhyaya samadhaya. Turning the attention from one thing to another becomes contemplation, in which the attention moves from the object of the to the very basis of the object Atma. Therefore, there is no real distraction. From Rama, then, Atma, the one who is everywhere, is Rama. Ramati ramyate. In this way, the distance between the thought and the self becomes very clear. That the thought is not everything. Thought is imbued with the self. And if I turn my attention towards the self, it becomes contemplation. Japa mantra, japa brings you to yourself or to the self. And if I turn my attention towards the self, it becomes contemplation. I appreciate the self as independent of the thought. The more I appreciate this fact, thought becomes purely a role. It is not taken as everything. This is the distance that I come to know. A distance that does not imply physical distance or a particular condition of the mind. It is insight, appreciation itself. And this appreciation becomes the reality. This is the practice that Krishna says would enable one to master the mind. Vairagya, objectivity. The second means for making the mind abide in itself is objectification. Mentioned here by Krishna is Vairagya, objectivity. Why does the mind go here and there in the first place? The mind goes elsewhere purely due to lack of interest. The nature of the mind is to go where there is some kick. Wherever there is something more interesting, some interest must be there, and toward that it goes. So without your trying to dwell upon anything in particular, the mind naturally goes towards the object that it finds more interesting. The mind goes towards an object of love and towards an object of pain also, since pain means something requires attention. These are the two places towards which the mind goes without any effort on your part. Why? Because one is interesting and the other requires attention. In an object of love, there is some joy, pleasureness. pleasantness to which the mind naturally goes, and towards any object that hurts you or as a hurt you, the mind goes quite naturally. One is positive, whereas the other, being something that requires attention, is negative. Object of pain can be taken care of by abhyasa, whereas vairagya is where with a reference to the object of love. By abhyasa, certain distance can be developed between you and the pain, although this may take some time. Vairagya is mentioned here separately because the source of all desires for happiness and security is what we call shobhandhasya shobhanadhasya dayasa, meaning that you superimpose certain attributes upon various objects in the world and then think these will bring you happiness and security, that a particular object is going to make you more secure in one such attribute, or by achieving this or that you are going to be different, you are going to become somebody, you are going to be acceptable to yourself and to others, first to others and then thereby to yourself. We seek acceptance from others because of superimposition. This is very important. Please listen. Seeking acceptability from others is nothing but self-acceptance through others. Why should anyone accept you? So that you can accept yourself. Therefore, seeking the acceptance of others can always be reduced to self-acceptance. Whether you seek this acceptance of others or you seek self-acceptance, it amounts to self-acceptance alone. Thus, either you seek acceptance through others or you yourself understand that you do not accept yourself and try to find out whether the self is acceptable, which is the real way of dealing with the other problems, with the problem in fact. Seeking self-acceptance, then we superimpose certain attributes upon objects, thinking that particular object is capable of giving something more than it can really give. Superimposing attributes that do not belong to the object is what is called adhyasa. When what is superimposed, adhyastha, is something positive according to our thinking, it is called shobhanadhyasa, meaning that which is very pleasing, for which there is certain enhancement. And infatuation, this infatuation or obsession is nothing but superimposition, shobhanadhyasa. The absence of shobhanadhyasa is what is meant by vairagya. Vairagya enables you to separate the objective attributes of any object from subjective superimposition you may have placed upon it. When superimposed attributes are understood as attributes that are superimposed, the object is reduced to its own status. For instance, to think that the absence of money makes you nobody is not true. The absence of money makes you moneyless, that's all. If you don't have money, you are moneyless. That's it. In fact, the absence of money makes you moneyless. Moneyless, you cannot buy things. In other fact, which can be followed yet by more facts, that you cannot buy is true, and that you cannot buy on credit is also true. Since you have no money to pay later, even if you buy on credit and do not pay it back, the time will come when you cannot buy on credit either. Who is going to give you credit if you do not pay endlessly? Then you can talk about facts. That I am nobody is not a fact. It is a superimposition. The feeling of being a nobody is sometimes something very intimate, because one has a stereotype of success, a conditioning that takes place by growing up in a society where money is respected with the awe of and wonder. In such a society, the person's success is talked about only in terms of money. To value money in this way is meaningless. Really, any mafia don, mercenary, or hitman also may have lot of money. Just because a person has money does not mean that the person is successful. Nevertheless, this is the orientation of some societies in the world. There is also another orientation that to be moneyless is something wonderful. This orientation holds that without money, one should be able to live one's life. Therefore, the person who lives without money, even a beggar who lives in the street, is highly praised. This orientation is equally silly. Both orientation place the value of money, which is a problem. The problem is not money itself. Money is just a money. Money is just a money. It is neither the problem nor the solution. Although money can solve some problem like anything else, even a toothpick can solve certain problems. If something is stuck in the too deep in the tooth, no money is going to help. It is the toothpick which is going to help. The superimposition is not deliberate. Therefore, to think that money is the source of the problem is not correct. There is a superimposition here which is not deliberately done by a person, but is something innate in a psyche that is exposed to certain value structure obtaining in the given society, causing the person to place an attribute on the money that is not really there. This superimposition, Shobhana Adhyasa, this is Shobhana Adhyasa, has to be neutralized by looking as money is. Having plenty of money or no money is no solution. This superimposition, Shobhan Adhyasa, has to be neutralized by looking money as money is and nothing more. To say that money has no value is just another Adhyasa. You are seeing something that is not true. Similarly, if you add something more to money than it is really there, it is also Adhyasa. Reducing the objects to other own status is enough. By doing this, you will find in yourself certain dispassion, which is Vairagya. A person is dispassionate in the sense that one is objective in one's judgment. Vairagya is understood more in terms of objectivity. Unless we understand its meaning clearly, there will be more problems. It does not mean that there is no desire. To think to think so means that every desire becomes a new source of problem. We are not creating ideals here, which would be only further distance us from ourselves. Therefore, we must be careful not to pick up any further confusion here. Vairagya means to be free of the longing that implies superimpositions. Shobhana Adhyasa. This is accomplished by neutralizing the Shobhana Adhyasa, thereby judging situations properly. One must be able to judge the importance of a given object. Money is required for certain things, that is it. I am nothing without money is wrong, is Shobhana Dhyasa. neutralizing the superimposition. Any object of liking can become an object of obsession sooner or later, and therefore a problem. There are books being written today about the people who love too much, meaning they cannot love at all because they cannot keep an object of love in its proper perspective. It becomes a problem for them. The object of love can consume a person so completely that it becomes an obsession, leading to attempt to control, weighing the position, and so on. To neutralize Shobhana Dhyasa, you need to understand the difference between the objective value and subjective imposition of values upon the object. How is it possible to see this difference? Shankara defines Vairagya here as the capacity to repeatedly see the limitation in both the seen and unseen object of enjoyment. Meaning here and in the hereafter, Vairagyam nama drashta adrashta bhogeshu dosha darshana abhyasata vaitarasnayam. Here limitation refers to what a given object can do, can and cannot give. Any object has some gunas, virtues and doshas. Defect or limitation. Therefore, you must see these limitations clearly. For example, money can buy, but it cannot make you enjoy. You can buy certain things which you like, but whether you will be able to enjoy or not is not in the hand of money. This is very important. Money can buy, but it cannot make you enjoy that. You may use it, but you may not enjoy it. You may use it, but you may not be happy with it. Seeing this is what makes you dispassionate. Once you are dispassionate, then your relationship with money is proper. It is an objective relationship, which is what we are talking about. You buy something useful. You buy a telephone. You buy a mobile phone, which is useful. You use it. You have to understand. You have to be dispassionate. Seeing things as they are, the capacity to look at things as they are is called objectivity. There is no judgment involved here, just an understanding of things as they are. This objectivity is especially important in terms of our subjective values, because we do not know the objects of these values as they really are. We are not concerned here with the physical structure of the object, only with the value we superimpose upon them. When I look at given object, I see that there are a lot of projections involved. Therefore, I see these projections of what they are, and I deal with them by separating them in the way I can look more objectively at how the object is going to make my life any better. That is now. Doing this again and again is abhyasa. And seeing the limitation of the object is vairagyam. All objects have limited. All objects are limited. Limited value they have. Repetition is essential because the subjective value does not go away just like that. This is because the value is something that is not deliberately imposed upon the object by you. Suppose you buy a piece of bronze thinking it as an antique. In fact, it has been oxidized to make it look like very old. An ear has been cut, the nose poked, and some scratches put on it to make it look as though it has fallen down a few times. All of these have been deliberately done to increase its value, and you buy it thinking it is an ancient piece. And when you realize that it is not antique, you are disappointed and experience a sense of loss. Now, what did you lose here? Only the subjective value that you had superimposed. The bronze does not have certain objective value. Thinking it as an antique, you had placed a subjective value on it. That subjective value has little or nothing to do with the objective value of the object. To think of the simple piece of bronze as something great is purely subjective, nothing more. People do the same thing with the blue jeans, buying new jeans that they have been made to look old. These jeans may even come with patches. Why? To make it look as though you have been around, for which you were prepared to pay higher price. Again, this is purely a subjective value. From this we can understand the difference between objective and subjective value of an object. Previously you looked at the piece of bronze as an antique, and now knowing it has not an antique, you look it as bronze. The object itself is the same as when you had bought it. It had no ear then and it has no ear now. Only your look is there. Only in your look there is a change. For all you know, it may be an antique. Perhaps the person who told you that it is not wants to take it off your hands and sell it for a fortune. If this were to happen, you would feel like a fool. If you find out, of course, in the realm of subjective value, anything is possible. The point I am making here is that if the vision of the object is as an antique goes away, then the attitude you will have is dispassion towards the object. If it is an antique, it is an antique. There is no problem. You simply look at it as an antique. That society has jacked up the price because of the subjective value placed upon it need not concern you at all. Whereas if you are an antique collector, everything about you becomes antique. There are people who want to collect and own certain objects at the point that it becomes an obsession with them. They call it an investment, but they will not part with it. For something to be an investment, you have to be able to sell it. But they will not sell because they have developed such an attachment for that object. There is no investment here. There is only a new problem that has been created. Only when the antique buddhi goes away, when the person can look at the object objectively, can there be vairagya. Vairagya is nothing but an emotional growth. When a subjective value superimposed upon an object is gone, when the object is just the object, this holds for all objects, that there is shobhana adhyasa, a superimposition that has taken place naturally, an extra attribute that does not really exist in the object has to be recognized. Therefore, again and again you see the object as it is, and in the wake of this knowledge, the superimposition goes. This does not mean that you need to conditionally remind yourself that this is not an antique, this is not an antique, this is not an antique. Such a japa is not you need not do it. But with the reference to money, power and acceptance of others, adhyasa and vairagya are both necessary. Seeing the limitation of the object and situation. over and over again. It is very important. If one is to master the mind, repetition is necessary, because the superimposition is not a deliberate thing. It is not a mistake that you have made by taking something to be more valuable than it is. If it were a mistake, a one time correction is adequate. Then there is no objectivity. But here it is not by a one time mistake that there is a superimposition. It is by your being what you are, a psychological being, very firmly rooted in terms of your concept of success. All concept of success are vairagya and vairagya. All concept of success and vairagya, dispassion, are within the range of psychology alone. Vairagya is nothing but the emotional growth of the person. Growth is strictly in terms of understanding the limitation of an object or situation. Again and again, until the superimposition falls apart. Then the world does not have a hold over you. Otherwise, the mind runs towards certain objects naturally, because they have been given such an importance by the society. There is some pain involved with the reference to certain old objects, what you could not get before, what you have lost in the past, which can cause problem in the mind. Whereas if vairagya is there, the old failure, those things that were source of some pain for you fell apart, and new object also do not have any hold over you. This is what is meant by seeing the limitation, dosha darshana, again and again, thereby bringing about a cognitive change which frees the mind to be great to a greater extent. The mind that is always chattering, always preaching, that is in form of agitation, being away from the dheya, object of meditation, atma, is difficult to master, can be mastered by abhyasa and vairagya. However, you can simply sit there and expect the mind to take care of itself. You have to pay some attention to it, as Krishna says in the next verse, which we will see tomorrow. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudashyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om Gurubhyo Namaha. Shriman Narayane Narayane Narayana Hari Har Narayana.